Have you ever felt like you've hit rock bottom for 24-year-old Ilara Vance? Rock bottom was a cold, rain-slicked pavement outside the fancy restaurant she'd just been fired from. With a sick sister to support and eviction looming, her world had crumbled. But what happens when the darkest moment of your life puts you directly in the path of a ghost from a past you never knew existed? A simple, worn-out pendant around her neck was about to unravel a secret so profound it would shatter the foundations of a billion-dollar empire. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story of rags to riches. It's a story about lies, loss, and a love powerful enough to cross decades of silence. The Gilded Spoon wasn't a restaurant, it was a theatre, and every night Ilara Vance played the part of an invisible stagehand. Her worn black flats, the soles smoothed thin from 1,000 frantic trips between the kitchen and the dining room, were a stark contrast to the polished marble floors that reflected the crystal chandeliers like a star-filled sky. The air thick with the cloying scent of truffle oil and the murmur of discreet wealth was a world away from her cramped one-bedroom apartment, where the dominant smell was antiseptic, and the only sound was the gentle whir of her sister, Lily's oxygen machine. Tonight the theatre was at full capacity. Ilara moved with practiced grace, a phantom balancing precariously stacked plates, her mind a frantic ledger of orders, allergies, and table numbers. Her focus was absolute, driven by a desperate need to make it through the shift. The rent was 3 weeks overdue. Lily's medication costs had skyrocketed again. Every dollar, every tip was a sandbag against a rising flood of debt. Her assigned section included Table 7, nestled in a coveted alcove. Its occupants were the Hudson's regulars, known for their bottomless wallets and tissue paper-thin patience. Mrs. Hudson, a woman whose face was pulled so tight it seemed to defy emotion, was scrutinizing the wine list as if it contained state secrets. Mr. Hudson was loudly narrating a business conquest into his phone. Ilara hissed, "Mr. Henderson, the restaurant's manager." His voice was a permanent oily whisper that always made Ilara's skin crawl. "Table 7 needs their appetizers. Now, Mr. Hudson is a personal friend of the owner. Remember that?" "Yes, Mr. Henderson." "Right away." She hurried to the kitchen, past the heat and shouting a familiar assault on her senses. Hudson Apps, she called, her voice strained. Chef Antoine, a man whose temper was as fiery as his sauces, slammed 2 plates onto the stainless steel counter. Seared foie gras with fig jam. "Be careful. The plate is hotter than hell." Ilara carefully wrapped the edges in a linen napkin and lifted the heavy ceramic dishes. As she navigated the narrow path between tables, a busboy, new and nervous, suddenly stepped backwards, without looking, his hip catching hers. For a terrifying, heart-stopping second, Ilara fought for balance. She managed to save 1 plate, tucking it against her body, but the other tilted a slow-motion catastrophe. The seared foie gras, a $60 appetizer, slid gracefully off the porcelain and landed with a sickeningly wet splat directly onto the lap of Mrs. Hudson's pristine, cream-colored silk dress. Silence descended upon the alcove. Mrs. Hudson let out a gasp that was more horror than surprise. Mr. Hudson ended his call with a furious snap. Every eye in the vicinity turned towards Ilara. The rich, dark fig jam was already blooming into an obscene stain on the expensive fabric. "Oh my God, I am so sorry." Ilara stammered, her face flooding with heat. She reached for a napkin, her hands trembling. "It was an accident, Accident." Mrs. Hudson's voice was a blade of ice. "This is a Chanel original. Do you have any idea what you've done, you clumsy girl?" Mr. Henderson materialized at the table, as if summoned by the scent of disaster. His face, usually a mask of forced politeness, was contorted with fury. He didn't even look at Alara. His entire focus was on placating the Hudsons. "Mr. and Mrs. Hudson, I am profoundly sorry. This is unacceptable. The entire meal is on the house, of course, and we will cover the cleaning of the dress or its replacement, whatever you wish." He then turned to Alara, his eyes narrowed into venomous slits. "My office. Now." The walk to his cramped, windowless office felt like a walk to the gallows. She could feel the stares of the other staff, a mixture of pity and relief that it wasn't them. She stood before his desk, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white, the faint scent of fig jam clinging to her uniform like the stench of failure. "Do you know how much damage you just caused?" Henderson began, his voice low and menacing. "It's not just the dress, it's the reputation. The Hudsons are patrons. They are investors. They expect perfection, not a circus act." "The busboy bumped into me, Mr. Henderson. It wasn't—" "I don't want to hear excuses," he snapped, slamming his hand on the desk. "I want competence. I want professionalism. Qualities you clearly lack. That little trinket around your neck is probably worth more than your entire paycheck. Yet you can't even carry a plate." He was gesturing to the small silver pendant she always wore. It was a stylized phoenix, its wings spread in flight, but with a unique flaw. The left wing was ever so slightly shorter than the right. It had been her mother's, the only thing of value she owned, a constant, comforting weight against her skin. His insult towards it was a sharper blow than any of his other words. "You're a liability, Alara," he said, his tone chillingly final. "Clean out your locker. You're fired." The words hit her like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. "Fired, but—" "My sister, she's sick. I need this job. Please, Mr. Henderson. I can't lose this job. I'll work a double shift for free for a week. I'll do anything." Her plea was met with a cold, dismissive wave. "That's not my problem. Your personal issues don't pay for Mrs. Hudson's Chanel. Security will escort you out." Numbness washed over her. She was led through the back of the house, past the sympathetic glances of the kitchen staff. She grabbed her worn coat and her small tattered purse from her locker. The security guard, a large man named Frank, who had always been kind to her, had a pained look on his face as he walked her to the back alley exit. "I'm sorry, kid," he mumbled. The heavy metal door clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing the closing of a chapter, the slamming of a door on hope itself. The alley smelled of stale grease and garbage. The first drops of a cold September rain began to fall, plastering loose strands of her brown hair to her cheeks. She stumbled out onto the street, the glittering lights of the city blurring through her tear-filled eyes. Fired. The word echoed in her mind, a death knell for her and for Lily. She sank onto a nearby park bench, oblivious to the rain that was now soaking through her thin uniform, and finally let out the sob she had been holding in a raw, ragged sound of utter despair. The city of Crestwood didn't care for tears. Its heart of glass and steel beat to a rhythm of ambition and commerce, a relentless pulse that drowned out the quiet sorrows of individuals. For Alara, sitting on that cold wrought-iron bench as the rain intensified, the city felt like a vast, indifferent ocean, trying to swallow her whole. Her cheap uniform was soaked through, clinging to her skin like a second colder layer. The initial storm of grief had subsided into a hollow, aching dread. Her mind raced a frantic maze with no exit. The landlord's final warning notice, the pharmacy's text message about Lily's prescription refill, the dwindling box of macaroni in her cupboard. Each thought was a fresh stab of panic. How could she tell Lily with her fragile hope and unwavering belief in her big sister's ability to make everything okay? She clutched the phoenix pendant, its silver cool against her feverish skin. It was a habit, a subconscious gesture she made when she was scared or lost. Her mother Isabella had given it to her on her 10th birthday, just a year before the illness took her. A phoenix always rises from the ashes, my love. Isabella had whispered, her voice weak but full of love. No matter what happens, you will always rise. The words felt like a cruel joke now. There were no ashes left to rise from. There was only a cold, watery grave of debt and despair. A sleek black car, the kind that seemed to glide rather than drive, pulled up to the curb a few feet away. It was a Bentley Mulsanne, its polished exterior reflecting the distorted city lights like liquid obsidian. Elara barely noticed it. Cars like that belonged to a different species of human inhabitants, of a world as alien to her as a distant star. The rear door opened, and a man stepped out holding a large black umbrella. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her rent for an entire year. His hair was a distinguished mix of dark brown and silver at the temples, and his face, though etched with the lines of stress and concentration, held a certain weary kindness. This was Julian Thorne. To the world, Julian Thorne was a titan of industry, the founder and CEO of Thorne Dynamics, a revolutionary green energy firm. His name was synonymous with innovation and ruthless business acumen. His face was a regular feature in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. To himself, however, he was a man haunted by ghosts, his vast fortune a poor substitute for what he had lost decades ago. He was on his way to a late-night merger meeting, a deal worth billions. His driver had pulled over to wait for a traffic light to change. Julian had been staring blankly out the tinted window, his mind churning over contractual clauses and market projections when he saw her, a lone figure on a bench, drenched and shaking her shoulders, slumped in a posture of utter defeat that resonated with a deep, forgotten part of his own soul. On any other night, he might have dismissed it. But tonight, something compelled him. An impulse, an echo of a younger, less cynical self. He'd seen enough corporate sharks to last a lifetime. Perhaps what he needed to see was a moment of simple human connection. "Stay here, Marcus," he said to his driver, stepping out into the rain. He approached her slowly, his expensive leather shoes making soft sounds on the wet pavement. "Excuse me, miss." Elara flinched, startled out of her miserable reverie. She looked up, shielding her eyes from the rain. She saw a wealthy man, an umbrella, and an expression of polite concern. Her first instinct was fear, the ingrained caution of a woman alone at night. She clutched her purse tighter. I'm fine," she mumbled, her voice hoarse from crying. "You're soaking wet." Julian said, his voice calm and steady. He extended the umbrella, holding it over her. "You'll catch your death out here. Is there somewhere I can give you a ride?" "My driver is just here." Elara stared at him, bewildered. Charity from a stranger in a Bentley. It felt like a scene from a movie, too surreal for her grim reality. "No, thank you. I live nearby." It was a lie. Her apartment was a 40-minute walk away. "Please," Julian insisted gently. "It's no trouble. I'm not some monster. I just saw you sitting here and it didn't seem right." He offered a small, disarming smile. "At the very least, take the umbrella." There was something in his eyes, not pity, but a kind of shared weariness, a deep-seated sadness that she recognized. Hesitantly, she nodded. "Okay. The umbrella. Thank you." As she reached to take it, her hand trembling from cold and emotion, her coat sleeve slid down her arm. The movement pulled the thin silver chain taut, and the phoenix pendant, which had been tucked inside her shirt, swung free. It dangled in the dim glow of the street lamp raindrops, clinging to its surface like tiny diamonds. Julian Thorne's polite smile vanished. His breath hitched in his throat. The world around him, The rain, the traffic, the billion-dollar meeting dissolved into a muted roar. His entire universe contracted to the small silver bird hanging from the young woman's neck. He froze. His face a moment ago, a mask of gentle concern, was now pale. His eyes wide, with a look of pure, unadulterated shock. He saw not just a piece of jewelry, but a ghost. He saw a summer long past, the smell of turpentine and lavender, the feel of molten silver under his tools, and the laughing eyes of a woman he had loved more than life itself. He saw the flaw, the one deliberate secret imperfection. The left wing a millimeter shorter than the right, a symbol only he and one other person in the world would ever understand. "Where?" he whispered, his voice, a raw, strangled sound that was barely audible over the rain. "Where did you get that necklace?" Ilara recoiled from the man's sudden intensity. The kindness in his eyes had been replaced by a fierce, almost desperate fire. His hand, which had been holding the umbrella, was now clenched into a white-knuckled fist at his side. The shift was so abrupt, so jarring, that her initial fear returned with a vengeance. It's mine," she stammered, instinctively covering the pendant with her hand. "Why are you asking?" "Please," Julian said, taking a half-step closer, his gaze locked on her hand. He seemed to be fighting to control his breathing. "I have to know. That design, it's not possible. Who gave it to you?" His raw emotion felt genuine, not threatening, but deeply unsettling. He wasn't a predator. He was a man who looked as though he'd seen a spectre. Ilara, despite her fear, felt a flicker of curiosity. How could her mother's old necklace provoke such a reaction in a complete stranger, a man of such immense wealth? "It was my mother's," she said softly, her voice still trembling. "She gave it to me before she passed away." The words struck Julian like a physical blow. He staggered back a step, his face ashen. "Your mother," he repeated the words hollow. "What was her name?" "Why do you want to know?" Ilara asked, her suspicion warring with the sheer strangeness of the situation. "Because," Julian's voice cracked, and he had to clear his throat to continue, "because a long, long time ago I made a pendant exactly like that one, with that same flaw. I made it for a woman I loved. Her name was Isabella." Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. The world tilted on its axis. It was a common name, surely. It had to be a coincidence. But the flaw, her mother had always called it, the pendant's little secret. "My mother's name, Ilara," whispered the rain, and the city sounds fading into a distant hum, "was Isabella Dubois." Julian Thorne closed his eyes. For a moment, Ilara thought he might faint. His hand went to the side of his car to steady himself. When he opened his eyes again, they were shining with unshed tears. Decades of carefully constructed composure, the emotional armor of a billionaire CEO, had shattered into a million pieces on a rainy Crestwood street. Isabella Dubois. He breathed the name, a sacred, painful prayer on his lips. "I don't understand. They told me she was gone. That the baby—" He trailed off his gaze, dropping from Ilara's face to her stomach, as if he were seeing through time. "They told me the baby didn't make it." Ilara's mind was reeling. Baby. What was he talking about? They who are they. Her parents. Julian said, his voice laced with an ancient, still-burning anger. Richard and Eleanor Dubois. They never approved of me. I was a penniless artist back then, living in a loft with nothing to my name but dreams and a handful of sculpting tools. They said I would ruin her life. He began to pace a caged animal on the wet pavement, the story pouring out of him, as if a dam had broken after 25 years. We were in love. We were going to run away together. She was pregnant. With you, he said, stopping to look at her. His eyes filled with a terrifying mix of hope and agony. Her parents found out. They forbade her from seeing me. They hired men to persuade me to stay away. One day I received a letter, a cold, formal letter from their lawyer. It said Isabella had suffered a complication and that the child was lost. It said she wanted nothing more to do with me. He looked at Ilara, his face a canvas of heartbreak. I was destroyed. I tried to reach her, but they had moved, changed her number. They threatened me with legal action. I was a poor, broken kid. They were one of the most powerful families in the state. I had no fight left in me. I believed them. Ilara stood frozen, the umbrella forgotten in her hand, the rain mixing with the tears now streaming down her own face. Her mother had never spoken of her father. Whenever Ilara had asked, Isabella would get a distant, sad look in her eyes and say only, "He was a wonderful artist, my love, and he would have adored you." She had never mentioned the name Dubois. Her mother had changed her name to Vance after she'd moved away to escape her family's shadow. The pieces were slotting together with horrifying clarity. Her controlling, wealthy grandparents, whom she'd never met. Her mother's quiet, unexplained sorrow. The phoenix pendant, a relic from a buried past. My mother. She told me he left her. Ilara choked out. She thought he abandoned her when he found out she was pregnant. Julian stared at her, the final devastating piece of the puzzle clicking into place. They lied. He whispered the realization, dawning on both of them at the same time. They lied to both of us. He had been told his child was dead, and the love of his life wanted him gone. She had been told the man she loved had abandoned her in her time of greatest need. Richard and Eleanor Dubois had surgically excised them from each other's lives, creating two separate lonely worlds built on a foundation of cruel deception. And standing between those two worlds on a rainy night, 24 years later, was the living proof of that lie. I can't believe this, Ilara said, shaking her head. This can't be real. Look at me, Julian said, stepping forward and gently taking her shoulders. His touch was tentative, as if he were afraid she might crumble into dust. My name is Julian Thorne. 25 years ago, I was Julian Tarnowski, a poor sculptor. I changed it after I made my first fortune. I've spent my entire adult life building an empire trying to fill the hole that was left when I lost your mother. But I never forgot her. I never stopped loving her. He reached out a trembling finger and lightly touched the pendant. This phoenix has one wing shorter than the other, because I told her that our love wasn't perfect. It was real. And that real things, strong things, can fly even if they're a little broken. It was our secret. The dam of Ilara's disbelief finally broke. She saw the truth in his anguished eyes, felt it in the raw sincerity of his voice. This man, this stranger, this billionaire, was her father. The father she had spent her entire life wondering about, yearning for. And in the very moment she found him, she also learned the depth of the betrayal that had kept them apart. The weight of it all, the firing, the rain, the revelation was too much. Her legs gave out, and she would have collapsed onto the pavement had Julian not caught her, pulling her into a hug that was both awkward and desperate. A father holding his daughter for the very first time, 24 years too late. The interior of the Bentley was a cocoon of silence and soft leather, a stark contrast to the storm raging both outside the car and inside Ilara's heart. Julian had cancelled his $1 billion meeting with a single terse phone call. The fate of Thorn Dynamics seemed insignificant compared to the seismic shift that had just occurred in his own life. He had instructed his driver, Marcus, to take them to his penthouse residence. During the silent drive, Ilara stared out the window, watching her own reflection, a pale, tear-streaked ghost superimposed over the glittering, rain-slicked city. She was the daughter of a billionaire. The thought was so absurd, so fundamentally alien, that her mind couldn't fully process it. It was like learning the sky was green or that water flowed uphill. Julian's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of the tallest residential building in Crestwood. It wasn't a home. It was a kingdom in the sky. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city lights stretching to the horizon. The space was vast, filled with museum-quality art, sleek, minimalist furniture, and an overwhelming sense of quiet, sterile wealth. "Can I get you something?" Julian asked, his voice strained. "A change of clothes? Something to eat?" Ilara just shook her head, pulling her damp, cheap coat tighter around herself. She felt like a stray cat brought into a palace, afraid to touch anything for fear of soiling it. "I need to call my sister," she said, her voice small. That brought the crushing weight of her reality flooding back. Lily, her job, the eviction notice. "Your sister?" Julian asked, his brow furrowed. With a choked voice, Ilara explained everything. The constant struggle, Lily's rare respiratory condition, the mounting medical bills, the firing from the gilded spoon. As he listened, Julian's expression shifted from shocked disbelief to a slow, simmering rage. The injustice of it all, that his daughter had been living a life of such desperate hardship while he existed in this sterile opulence, was a bitter pill to swallow. The manager, Henderson, the Hudsons, the entire system that allowed this to happen, became the focus of his fury. "That's over," Julian said, his voice hard as steel. "All of it. Your financial worries are finished. We will get your sister the best doctors in the world, I promise you." He then paused, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "First, we need to be sure. For both our sakes." He understood her lingering doubt. It was too much to accept on faith alone. He led her into a vast, private study. The walls were lined with books, but one wall was covered in framed sketches and blueprints. He stopped in front of a series of charcoal drawings. They were portraits of a young woman with laughing eyes and a cascade of dark hair. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. It was her mother, Isabella, but younger, more vibrant than Ilara had ever known her. "I drew these," Julian said quietly. "That was the summer we fell in love." He then opened a portfolio on his large oak desk. Inside were more sketches, but these were of jewelry, pendants, rings, bracelets. And there, on a yellowed piece of drafting paper, was the original design for the Phoenix pendant. Every detail was there, down to the notes in the margin specifying the exact dimensions, including the deliberate imperfection of the left wing. Below it, in his youthful handwriting, were the words, "For Isabella. So we can always fly, even if we're a little broken." The sight of it, the tangible proof, was overwhelming. Ilara reached out and touched the drawing, the final wall of her skepticism crumbling to dust. It was in this moment of raw emotional discovery that a new figure entered the scene. A woman, tall and elegant in a silk robe, appeared in the doorway of the study. She had perfectly coiffed blonde hair and eyes that were as cool and calculating as a winter sky. This was Victoria Davenport, Julian's fiancée of 6 months. "Julian, darling, your meeting was cancelled. Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice a smooth, cultured purr. Her eyes then fell on Ilara, dishevelled, tear-stained, and clearly out of place. Victoria's polite smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Who is this?" Julian turned, the emotional turmoil of the past hour still plain on his face. "Victoria. This is Ilara. It's a long story, but I believe she is my daughter." The mask of politeness dropped from Victoria's face, replaced by a flicker of pure, unadulterated shock, which was quickly masked by practiced concern. "Your daughter, Julian? That's impossible. You told me you never had children." "I told you what I believe to be the truth," Julian said, his voice firm. He quickly summarized the incredible story, Isabella, the lies, the pendant. Victoria listened, her expression a careful mix of sympathy and skepticism. But behind her eyes, a frantic calculation was taking place. She had spent 2 years carefully positioning herself to become Mrs. Julian Thorne. The Thorne fortune, the power, the social standing, it was all within her grasp. A long-lost daughter, a legitimate heir, was not just a complication. She was a cataclysmic threat to her plans. This girl, this waitress, could potentially inherit billions that Victoria considered rightfully hers. "Oh, you poor thing," Victoria said, turning to Ilara, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "To have been through so much. But Julian, we must be careful. People can be opportunistic. A story like this, a girl in desperate need of money. It's a classic con. It's not a con, Victoria," Julian said sharply, a protective instinct he didn't know he possessed rising to the surface. "Look at the pendant, the drawings. It's real." "Of course, darling. I'm just worried about you," she cooed, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. "We'll get a DNA test, naturally, just to put everyone's mind at ease." Ilara felt a chill run down her spine. She could see past Victoria's facade. She saw the cold assessment in her eyes, the flicker of territorial hostility. She was not a potential stepdaughter. She was an obstacle. An enemy had just revealed herself without saying a single hostile word. The next few hours were a blur. Julian's personal physician was summoned to the penthouse to take DNA samples from both him and Ilara, with results promised on a priority rush. Julian's legal team was woken and briefed. A suite of rooms larger than her entire apartment was prepared for Ilara. As she stood in the opulent guest bedroom, dressed in a borrowed cashmere sweater that felt softer than anything she had ever touched, Ilara looked at her reflection in the full-length mirror. She was the same person, yet everything was different. She had a father. She had a family history steeped in tragedy and deceit. And she had an enemy living under the same roof, an enemy with sharp eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. Her new life had just begun, and it was already more complicated and dangerous than she could have ever imagined. The fight for her past was over, but a new fight, the fight for her future, was just beginning. The DNA test results were a formality. Julian Thorne already knew the truth in his bones. But when the email arrived 2 days later with the subject line 9% probability, the official confirmation still hit him with the force of a tidal wave. He printed the document and walked to the guest suite where Ilara was staying, his hands trembling slightly. Ilara had spent the past 48 hours in a daze, torn between overwhelming joy and profound grief for the life she and her mother could have had. She had spoken to Lily on the phone, telling her only that a wonderful opportunity had come up, and that she was safe, promising to explain everything soon. She couldn't bring herself to unload the whole impossible story over the phone. When Julian showed her the printed results, she read the words over and over again. Paternity conclusively established. It was real. She wasn't an orphan anymore. She had a father. She threw her arms around him, and this time the hug wasn't awkward or desperate. It was a hug of acceptance of shared loss and newfound hope. But with the confirmation came a cold, hard resolve in Julian. For 24 years he had been mourning a ghost. For 24 years his daughter had struggled to survive. The people responsible for this ocean of pain had to answer for it. "We're going to see them," Julian said, his voice quiet but steely. "Richard and Eleanor Dubois, your grandparents." Elara felt a knot of fear and anger tighten in her stomach. "What's the point? What can they possibly say?" "I don't know," Julian admitted. "But they owe you an explanation. They owe us an explanation. We can't move forward until we've confronted the past." The Dubois estate was a sprawling old money mansion in the oldest part of the state, a fortress of brick and ivy that looked down its nose at the modern glass towers of Crestwood. As Julian's Bentley crunched up the long gravel driveway, Elara felt a sense of profound disconnect. This was her mother's childhood home. This was a part of her heritage, yet it felt as alien and forbidding as a prison. They were met at the door by a stern-looking housekeeper who led them into a cavernous, sunless drawing room. The air was heavy with the scent of beeswax and regret. Moments later, Richard and Eleanor Dubois entered. They were in their late 70s, impeccably dressed with postures as rigid as the antique furniture surrounding them. Richard was tall and thin with a face of granite. Eleanor was bird-like and frail, but her eyes were as sharp and unforgiving as chips of ice. They showed no surprise at seeing Julian. A man of his stature did not arrive unannounced, without his presence being known. It was Elara they stared at their gazes, cold and analytical, searching for some resemblance to the daughter they had betrayed. "Julian," Richard said, his voice dry as autumn leaves. "To what do we owe this unexpected intrusion?" "Don't pretend you don't know," Julian shot back, stepping forward to stand protectively beside Elara. "You owe us 24 years. You owe us a lifetime. I want to know why." Eleanor Dubois let out a faint, disdainful sniff. "We did what was necessary to protect our daughter. You were nothing. A penniless bohemian with paint under your fingernails. You would have dragged her into poverty and ruin. We gave her a chance at a proper life." "A proper life." Elara found her voice, and it was shaking with a fury she didn't know she possessed. "You call the life she had proper. She was heartbroken. She spent her entire life believing the man she loved had abandoned her. She died, thinking she was alone. We offered to support her," Richard stated coolly, as if discussing a business transaction, "on the condition that she cut all ties with you and gave the child up for adoption. It was a reasonable offer. She was the one who chose to run away to change her name and live in squalor. Her stubbornness was always her greatest flaw." The casual cruelty of his words, the complete lack of remorse, was staggering. They spoke of their daughter's heartbreak and their granddaughter's life as collateral damage in a campaign to uphold their own pride and prejudice. "And you told me the baby was dead," Julian said, his voice dangerously low. "You let me believe for more than 2 decades that my child had died." "A necessary untruth," Eleanor said, lifting her chin. "It was cleaner that way. It allowed you both to move on. We had hoped you would have the decency to stay buried in the past." "Decency," Elara cried out, taking a step forward. "You talk about decency. You destroyed 3 lives to protect your family name. You let my mother die of a broken heart, and you let me grow up struggling for every scrap, worrying every single day about how to pay for food and medicine for my sister. All while you sat here in this museum of cruelty." For the first time, A flicker of something, perhaps surprise at Ilara's fire, crossed Eleanor's face. Sister Isabella had another child. Yes, Ilara spat. A child you will never meet, a granddaughter you don't deserve to know. The confrontation was raw, brutal, and ultimately unsatisfying. There was no grand apology, no tearful reconciliation. There was only the cold, unyielding pride of two people who believed their wealth and status gave them the right to play God with the lives of others. They admitted their actions without a shred of guilt, viewing their lies as a form of difficult but necessary surgery. As they walked away from that cold, suffocating house, Ilara felt not closure but a profound sadness. She hadn't gotten the answers she craved, because there were no reasonable answers. There was only the selfish, twisted logic of two cruel, powerful people. Back in the car, Julian reached over and took her hand. "I'm sorry," he said. I don't know what I thought. But now we know. They are who they are. They are the past. We said, he squeezed her hand, are the future. Ilara looked at her father, this incredible man who had been stolen from her and squeezed back. The ghosts of the past had been faced. They were ugly and unrepentant, but they no longer held any power. They were just sad old people in a sad old house. Her new life, her real life, was just beginning. With the ghosts of the Dubois family banished to the past, a new chapter began. Julian Thorne, a man accustomed to conquering boardrooms and navigating global markets, now faced his most challenging and rewarding project, being a father. He moved Ilara and Lily into a private wing of his penthouse. The city's top pulmonologist was brought in to oversee Lily's care, and within weeks, under new treatment regimens, and with access to the best medical technology, the little girl began to blossom. The constant wheeze in her breath softened, and the color returned to her cheeks. For the first time, Ilara saw her sister run across a room without needing to stop for her inhaler. The sight brought tears of pure joy to her eyes. Julian cherished every moment. He learned that Ilara had her mother's artistic eye and a quiet, fierce intelligence. He discovered Lily's wicked sense of humor and her obsession with astronomy. They fell into a comfortable, loving routine. There were movie nights with mountains of popcorn, clumsy attempts by Julian to cook breakfast, and long talks on the penthouse terrace under the stars, filling in the 24-year gap in their lives. Ilara, finally free from the crushing weight of financial anxiety, began to heal. She smiled more, her shoulders relaxed, and the perpetual worry in her eyes was replaced by a soft, hopeful light. But while this new family was blooming, the serpent in their garden was plotting. Victoria Davenport watched this domestic bliss with a growing sense of panic and loathing. Every laugh between Julian and his daughters was like a nail in the coffin of her ambitions. Her position, once so secure, was now precarious. She was no longer just Julian's fiancée. She was the outsider, the third wheel. She saw the way Julian looked at Ilara with a love and pride that he had never shown her. She knew a direct confrontation would be foolish. Julian was fiercely protective of Ilara. So she chose a more insidious route, a campaign of 1,000 cuts designed to poison Julian's mind against his newfound daughter and ruin Ilara's reputation before she could even establish one. Her first move was subtle. She began making comments disguised as concern. "Julian, darling, don't you think it's wise to set up a trust for Ilara? Giving her direct access to credit cards with no limit might be overwhelming for a girl with her background. Or I saw Ilara talking to one of the maids today for quite a while. I do hope she isn't filling the staff's heads with stories of her hard life. It could be so disruptive to morale. When these barbs failed to find their mark, her tactics escalated. She knew Julian valued his company's pristine public image above all else. Thorn Dynamics was built on a reputation of integrity and transparency. That was the weak point she would attack. Victoria hired a private investigator to dig into Ilara's past, searching for any dirt she could find. But Ilara's life was disappointingly clean. It was a simple story of hardship and hard work. Undeterred, Victoria decided that if she couldn't find a scandal, she would create one. She found the perfect pawn in Mr. Henderson Ilara's former manager at the Gilded Spoon. After a discreet inquiry, Victoria learned that Henderson was a bitter, resentful man with gambling debts. She arranged a meeting. Mr. Henderson, Victoria said, her voice smooth as silk as they sat in a private booth at a discreet hotel bar. I represent a party that is very interested in the true story of Ilara Vance's departure from your establishment. She slid a thick envelope across the table. I believe she was fired for cause. Theft, perhaps? Henderson's eyes widened at the sight of the cash. Well, he began, his greasy demeanor returning. Now that you mention it, there were always discrepancies in the till on her shifts. Little amounts. We could never prove anything, of course, but her firing was long overdue. She was a troublemaker, always complaining. It was all Victoria needed. She anonymously leaked the story to a notorious online gossip columnist known for his vicious takedowns. The headline was explosive: Billionaire's newfound daughter, a thief. Julian Thorne's Cinderella story hides a dark past. The article was a masterpiece of innuendo and outright lies. It painted Ilara as a manipulative grifter who was fired for stealing from her employer. It quoted an anonymous source, Henderson, who described her as lazy and dishonest. The story spread like wildfire through social media and financial news outlets. The blow landed exactly as Victoria had intended. Julian was blindsided. He was in a board meeting when his head of PR burst in, phone in hand, his face pale. The scandal threatened to tarnish the Thorne name and cast doubt on Julian's judgment, just as he was navigating a delicate public offering. That evening, the atmosphere in the penthouse was thick with tension. Julian, for the first time, looked at Ilara with a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He didn't want to believe it, but the seed of poison had been planted. "Ilara, is there any truth to this?" he asked, holding up his tablet with the article displayed. "Anything at all?" "No." Ilara cried, her heart breaking at the question. "He fired me because I spilled a drink on a customer. He's lying. Why would he do this?" "He's a bitter man, perhaps," Victoria interjected, feigning sympathy. "But Julian, darling, the optics are terrible. A fired waitress, a story of theft. People will believe what they want to believe. This could seriously damage the IPO." Victoria's plan was working perfectly. She had created a crisis that positioned Ilara as a liability to the one thing Julian had spent his life building, his company. She was driving a wedge between father and daughter, using the power of public opinion as her hammer. Ilara felt the walls closing in. She had just found her father, only to be put in a position where her very existence threatened his life's work. The joy and security she had so briefly tasted were turning to ash in her mouth, all because of the smiling, venomous woman standing right beside them. The fallout from the article was swift and brutal. Thorne Dynamics' stock dipped, and whispers from the board of directors grew louder. The narrative Victoria had crafted was dangerously effective. Julian Thorne, the brilliant strategist, had been duped by a common grifter. The Cinderella story had soured into a cautionary tale. Julian was caught in an agonizing conflict. His heart told him Ilara was telling the truth, but his mind, conditioned by decades of corporate warfare, saw the damage unfolding. He became distant, consumed by damage control meetings and tense calls with investors. For Ilara, the silence was worse than any accusation. The warmth that had begun to build between them was freezing over, and the vast penthouse once again felt like a gilded cage. Seeing her father's distress and the shadow of doubt in his eyes, Ilara knew she couldn't just stand by. Her old life had taught her resilience. She wasn't just a billionaire's daughter. She was Ilara Vance, a survivor. She realized she had to fight back, not with Julian's lawyers, but with the simple, undeniable truth. Her first step was to think about her accuser. What did she know about Mr. Henderson? He was petty cruel, and she now suspected deeply dishonest. She remembered hushed conversations among the staff about his expensive tastes and his frequent stressed phone calls. She reached out to Frank, the kind security guard who had walked her out on her last night. "Frank, it's Ilara," she said when he answered. "I need your help. I think Mr. Henderson is the one who has been stealing from the restaurant." Frank, who had always disliked the manager, was willing to listen. Ilara explained her theory that Henderson was skimming cash and using her as a scapegoat. Frank agreed to discreetly check the security footage from the back office, away from the main cameras for the weeks leading up to her firing. Meanwhile, Julian, unable to reconcile the loving daughter he knew with the thief described in the papers, launched his own investigation. He didn't tell Ilara, ashamed of his own flicker of doubt. He hired the best corporate security firm in the country, not to investigate Ilara, but to conduct a deep background check on Victoria Davenport and Mr. Henderson. The two investigations converged with stunning results. Frank called Ilara 2 days later, his voice urgent. "You were right, kid. The footage from the camera overlooking the safe is grainy, but it's clear. Henderson was in there almost every night after closing no witnesses. He was pocketing cash. Lots of it." At almost the same moment, Julian was sitting in his study, staring at a report from his investigators. It contained bank records showing a $50,000 anonymous cash deposit into Mr. Henderson's account the day after Ilara was fired. More damningly, it contained phone records. A single call was made from a burner phone purchased by Victoria's personal assistant to Mr. Henderson on the day of their meeting. The location data from the phone placed it at the very hotel bar where they had met. The serpent had left a trail. The final piece of the puzzle was the security footage from that hotel which the investigators had acquired. It showed a clear image of Victoria Davenport, her face obscured by large sunglasses, but her distinctive designer handbag in full view, sliding an envelope across the table to a sweating, eager Mr. Henderson. The truth crashed down on Julian with the force of an avalanche. He had been played. He had allowed this viper to sow doubt in his mind against his own daughter. The guilt was immense. He found Ilara in the library, where she was nervously waiting with Frank's evidence. He held up his own report. Their eyes met, and in that instant everything was clear. "I'm so sorry, Ilara," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I am so sorry I ever doubted you even for a second." The resolution was swift and decisive. Julian called a press conference. He didn't just issue a denial. He laid out the entire story. He played the security footage of Henderson stealing. He presented the evidence of Victoria's bribery and manipulation. He spoke of the lies of the Dubois family and of finding the daughter he thought he had lost forever. He ended by bringing Ilara onto the stage. She stood before the flashing cameras, nervous but resolute. "My name is Ilara Vance," she said, her voice clear and strong. "For most of my life, I was a poor waitress, trying to care for my sister. The last few weeks have been a dream, but they have also been a nightmare. What I've learned is that wealth and power don't make you a good person. Integrity does. And the truth," she said, looking at her father, "the truth will always rise just like a phoenix from the ashes." The public narrative flipped overnight. Elara became a symbol of resilience and integrity. Victoria Davenport became a social pariah, her engagement to Julian publicly and humiliatingly terminated. She disappeared from the public eye, her ambitions in ruins. Mr. Henderson was arrested, and the owner of the Gilded Spoon issued a public apology to Elara. In the aftermath, Elara, Julian, and a now healthy Lily sat together on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. "I don't want to just be Julian Thorne's daughter," Elara said thoughtfully. "All those years of struggling, they taught me things. They taught me about injustice, about how easily people can be broken by a system that doesn't care. I want to do something with that." A smile touched Julian's lips. "What do you have in mind?" "I want to start a foundation," she said, her eyes shining with purpose. "The Phoenix Foundation. It will provide emergency financial aid and legal support for people who have been unjustly fired. It will help families struggling with medical debt. It will give people a chance to rise up just like we did." Julian looked at his daughter, not a girl anymore, but a strong, compassionate woman forged in the fires of adversity. He saw her mother's heart and his own fighting spirit combined into something truly special. "I think," he said, putting his arm around her, "that is the best investment I will ever make." Together the three of them looked out at the city, no longer a cold, indifferent ocean, but a landscape of possibility. They were a family, forged by lies and loss, but bound by a love that had proven unbreakable. They had faced the ghosts of the past and the serpents of the present, and from the ashes of a shattered life, they were ready to build a new future together. And so Elara's story comes full circle. Not with a simple happily ever after, but with a new beginning built on purpose and strength. Her journey reminds us that our circumstances do not define our character, and that the darkest nights can often lead to the most brilliant dawns. It's a powerful testament to the idea that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in love, integrity, and the courage to fight for the truth. What started with a shattered plate in a fancy restaurant ended with a family healed, and a mission to help thousands of others find their own strength to rise from the ashes. If Elara's incredible journey from despair to hope touched your heart, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that miracles can happen. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will inspire, shock, and move you. Your support helps us continue to find and share these powerful tales. Thank you for listening.